What's up, nerds? Welcome back. Today we're talking about the ongoing adventures of a very original and very entertaining story known as Stud and the Bloodblade in issue number 2. So now, if you're new to my channel, you might not have heard, before this series actually came out in print, I actually had the writer of it reach out to me and ask me if I'd be willing to read, the digital issue. So I have actually read this entire story. I already know what's going to happen in the next one, which is actually the last issue of it. I already know all of that. But I decided to buy it in print anyway because I was like, this story is so cool, I just want to own it. You know what I mean? So this is the next part. I don't remember when I did the review of the first issue. I did a preview review of the very first issue when I just had it digitally. Then when I bought the first issue, I did a review of that, so definitely go back and watch that if you haven't watched this. And then now we're carrying on with issue 2, which I actually got I think last week or maybe about a week and a half ago. But yeah, I had it sitting here on my desk because I was like, I'm going to do a review of this. I don't care how many books I end up doing before that, I'm going to do a review of this. I have to. So anyway, and not because I feel obligated to, because I genuinely want to. So we're going to keep going with this. In case you didn't watch that first video and you don't really want to go back and rewatch it right now, I'm going to give you a brief rundown. Basically, Stud is the protector of this planet, and he's now been trapped inside of his blade, also known as the Bloodblade, because it requires blood for him to stay on the outside. Otherwise, he gets swapped out with a weakling named Gary. And in that first issue, we saw that he ended up hooking up with another guy named Astro, or his full name was Ben Astro Zeno, but everyone just calls him Astro for short. He came here on a rocket ship that crashed onto their planet, and all of the other astronauts died. And then when Astro got killed with the blade, that's what brought Stud back out. And then he ended up back inside of the blade. So that's where we're picking up, where Stud is inside of the blade, and he's having to actually, because as we can see, surrounding him are all of the people he's killed with the blade, and of course they all have a massive problem with him, as you would expect. So he's trying to say last time it took a week to convince him to hoist the blade and slice a squirrel, which he's talking about Gary, because he needs Gary to kill someone or for the blade to absorb blood in some way, which usually is through Gary doing something. So he was like, it took a long time just to get him to do it the last time, just to kill a squirrel with the damn thing. So he's saying just enough blood to set me free. Or was last night with Astro, but Astro is back now. So how did it even happen? And then that's when all the people are behind him were like, you happened, Stud, to all of us, but no fancy sword to protect you now. So he's like I told the last guy, I don't need the blade. So he automatically starts fighting with all of them. And what I love about it, we don't get the names of all of them, but from the names that we do get of some of these villains, they all just have very hilarious names. But anyway, we go from over to there to where Gary is with Witch Tress, because basically that's her son. Or really, it's still Stud. Her son is actually dead. As we saw in the first issue, if you remember, when Gary first, picked up the sword or whatever, and he was, looking at it because Stud gave it to him, he, picked it up and it, fell onto his face and, cut his face in half and shit. And that was when Witch Tress basically, cursed Stud and the blade so that if he didn't feed it blood, he wouldn't be able to stay outside. Anyways, we're picking up there, and this is where Lava Voom, who is trying to tell her, yo, that's not your son, that's Stud. Remember the whole curse you did or whatever? So Witch Tress is telling her, what do you know, childless cur? And she's saying, I know that boy is the work of your own curse, a trick to weaken Stud. Now we can kill him once and for all. So she just tells her, no, you're not going to do that. I forbid it or whatever. But she's saying, she's thinking to herself, but is Lava Voom right? So she looks at the kid and she's like, who are you, boy? Tell me. And he says, I can't remember much, but I know I love you, mother. So that's where Lava Voom was like, he's lying or whatever. But she's like, no, Stud is a murderous brute, but he's no liar. He's too stupid. So she's saying, your curse says, feed the blade or become, pardon me, a wussy mama's boy. Hello? So, very obviously, but she's still, just refusing to accept it. So Lava Voom is basically telling her, look, if you won't accept it, then I'm going to go ahead and make this happen. So that way you'll have to, accept it. But Witch Tress tells her, look, when I cast the curse, magic is a very unpredictable thing. I don't have control over it, I can only direct it. So I have no control over how the curse actually works. All I can do is cast it and it will do its thing. So she's saying, like, and Stud's blade, perhaps there was more to it than mere steel. So Lava Boom is telling her, like, well, we'll never know because he chucked it about a mile that way. Hate to break up this family reunion, but didn't we come here for the Demon King? Tell me we didn't get our butts kicked for nothing. So she's like, no, of course not. Like, this is absolutely where the Demon King's egg or whatever is supposed to be. Like, all we gotta do is get inside and find it. So she says, come, Gary. You've returned just in time to witness your mother's ultimate victory. But Lava Boom turns over to Can of Peaches and Sassy Quatch, and is telling them, like, hold up, I got another idea. She says, Witch Tress is convinced that thing is her son, and she'll kill us over it. To change her mind, we have to go dig up the real Gary. And then we can see where Dillo, which is Stud's, like, trusty steed, is, like, sitting there or standing there, like, eating some fruits or whatever. So that will become important later on. Anyway, so we see where Stud's other friend, Egal, is taking Astro because she took him and one of their other, like, disabled team members or whatever, other astronauts to Alpha, right? Omega Alpha? Or no? Whatever. The name of the, like, city and shit. So she took him there and she's saying, like, it's a pretty amazing sight, isn't it? And he says, almost enough to make me forget my wife was just bisexual. And she's like, oh yeah, sorry about that. But anyway, they get down and Astro's like, what the hell is that? Because he sees this, like, living, talking beard. And she's like, oh yeah, Witch Tress actually, like, poisoned our main wizard, but his beard kept on living. So this is Beard Amos. So he's like, living beard. Right, so that's where the beard introduces himself, and then we see where some of the other astronauts come up and are telling, like, Astro, like, this place is incredible, like, I think we found our new home, you're gonna love it here. And then the girl is saying, like, we should have an orgy to celebrate. Yeah, she just said that. So anyway, she says, like, when Ilel gets here, let's have an orgy. That's where it is. So he's like, well, Ilel, my Noya is gone. One of those monsters got her. So, of course, they both come over and start hugging him. They're like, oh, we're so sorry. And the girl is like, yes, you need this more than any of us, as she's literally grabbing his crotch. So, I mean, hey, I respect or I appreciate the consideration of my needs, but, you know, I'm kind of in mourning at the moment. And so even Egal is like, what is going on? And they're just saying, like, we're comforting our friend. So she's like, okay. So Beard Amos is like, okay, well, we're going to go and help your other friend who's in the wheelchair unless you plan to comfort him too. And they're like, that's messed up. He's in a coma. She was like, hey, I don't know. Like, I just found out that apparently y'all do this orgy thing to, like, comfort each other. Anyway, so Astro's telling him, like, I'll go with you, Beard Amos. And he tells them, like, guys, get started without me. So they turn over to Egal and they're like, hey, you want in on this orgy? And she's just kind of standing there like, but as we'll see later, she does actually give into it. Anyway, so Astro is telling him, like, sorry if we came on a bit strong back there. We've just been through a lot. But he's saying, like, yeah, more than you realize. And he asks him, what do you mean? So he's telling him, like, this might be hard for you to understand, but you all bear the mark of double time. Our world, Ouroboros, sits at the edge of time, teetering between far future and primordial past. So he says, you are no doubt familiar with Omega Alpha. And he's like, Ermagerd? Because if you remember in the first issue, like, when Stud introduced that concept of Omega Alpha to him, he was like, Ermagerd? So he does it again. And then Beard almost explains, like, the celestial event unfolding above. I suspect it's how you arrived. So he's like, oh yeah, you mean the black hole that we flew through? And he says, yes, it's a black hole and star. As the void finishes its meal, immense power belches forth, rippling reality's fabric. Space-time crests and breaks and recedes to crest again. Double time. If this is the second time, what happened the first? Astro asks. So he tells him, like, he tells him, this will sound strange, but you, all of you, died. So he just kind of looks and he's like, what the hell? So anyway, he's just like, don't worry, I'm going to go inform the king of what's happened. You just wait right here. You're going to be fine. We'll go figure out what's going to happen and how we can help y'all. So he leaves, and we can see from this very small panel that he actually locks the door behind him and leaves Astro in there, like, with his disabled teammate. So he starts talking to him, like, saying, like, that Stud guy did act strangely familiar. Did I know him before I died? So he turns to him, he's like, geez, Trevor, you're the lucky one, sleeping right through this madness. So he's like, sorry, I know getting attacked by an alien isn't lucky. So all of a sudden, Trevor starts like freaking out, like in pain and shit. He's like, Trevor? And then we see this shit where like this giant bug like busts out of his skull and shit. So Astro's there. He's like, get away from me and everything as it jumps at him. So that's where we go back over to Stud, who's still fighting all of these like villains in his Bloodblade and everything, and so he's still kind of getting the upper hand. He like takes out I think it's Dracurilla, something like that, the Dracula gorilla thing. So he kind of like disables him for a moment, and then all of a sudden he's like, who's next? And he gets jumped by the squirrel that Gary killed earlier, the one that he mentioned before. So he gets jumped by that. He's like, ah, shit. So he keeps getting attacked, and they kind of manage to subdue him for a second, and then this other one comes up and says, yeah, clear a path so I can get my licks in. And he's like, Wolfpack? So he's like, oh, so you remember me, and we can see why his name is Wolfpack. He's got a bunch of wolf heads. So he comes up and starts like fighting with him. He's like, of course, my oldest friend. And he's saying like, I would have gotten older if you hadn't like killed me with that damn blade. And he says, we can't have sheep thieves in Crony's new world. So that's when this other one comes up, Shark Raving Mad, comes up and is saying, like, don't talk about that bastard in the presence of Shark Raving Mad. You might not remember me, but I know you. I saw every Ouroborean crawl out of the heart of the Eidolon Sea as mere blobs of protoplasm. So he's like, well, the protoplasm part sounds familiar, but you? He starts saying, like, I remember Xylophin, I remember Dracurilla, I remember Headshot, which is this little, like, he has, like, a big muscular body, but it's actually a really small guy, like, on the shoulders with a little, like, minigun and shit, and that's the head. That's why he's called Headshot, which I thought was just cute. Anyway. So Shark Raving Mad tells him, like, I guarded Loop's tip, the final remnant of the great serpent as he slithers between ages. So that's why it's actually called Ouroboros, because they play with that whole thing, the snake. So anyway, he's saying, like, in time, Loop will reclaim his tail and ignite the next bang. That abomination Crony can see more than any man should. He knew the power of Loop's tail and sent men to steal it. I dispatched the intruders, but not before they were able to, like, get a piece of Loop and everything. So when he went to try and, like, reclaim it, that was when he found out, oh shit, Crony actually reforged it into the blade that is the Bloodblade. So he says, like, yeah, he warped it into the very blade in which we are now prisoners. You're that. So that's where Stud is like, oh, you're that guy, like the dude whose head I cut off when I first got the sword and shit. So he says, are you so pleased to do the bidding of a freak who puts the natural order at risk? And he's just like, well, Crony has a vision for a better world. So that's when Wolfpack comes up and is like, and what's your place in that better world, mass murderer? And he says, like, blood is on your hands as well. He's like, yo, I kill to eat. You just kill to kill. So, I mean, that is a pretty good distinction to make. Anyway, Shark Raving Mad is like, Crony will toss you aside once you've served your purpose. So he's like, no, get off and everything. And then, like, he manages to, like, get them all off of him just, like, through sheer willpower and everything. And then he's saying, like, let me out of here. And then he sees that Dillo picked up the sword and is, like, running away with it. So he's like, yes, take it. Take the sword back to Crony. Like, he'll know what to do and everything. So, yeah, he says, take me to Prime, friend, and we will settle this once and for all. So that's where we go back over to Witch Tress with Gary in the ship. And she's like, I think we're getting closer. But she thinks, like, all the rest of the group is with them. But Gary has to tell her, like, yeah, they all kind of left. Like, I'm pretty sure it's because they don't like me or whatever. Like, is it my fault? And she says, oh, my sweet Gary, I would take you over 1,000,000 of them. So she's just saying, like, we'll find the Demon King on our own. As a being as powerful as he will leave a trace of his presence revealed by my magic. So that's how she's able to, like, create this magical trail that leads them. She's like, oh, it looks like he took off and we should follow. So they take off from there, and then we go back over to Lava Voom and her little team, because they've basically now gone to, like, the homeland of Witch Tress, and they're walking through as Canna Peaches is like, this is Witch Tress's, like, ancestral home, and she's like, yeah, the worst lands, because, you know, there are a lot of places that have been called bad lands, but apparently this is the worst lands. Anyway, so she's saying, like, this is where her family, like, Witch Tress's family used to run Ouroboros, and she says she's actually one of the nice ones, as this gigantic monster picks up Sasquatch and, like, just bites her in half. So again, this bitch dies really quickly. So Lava Voom was like, hell, we need to get the hell out of here, like, just run. So they take off, and then we go over to where Crony, the king, is sitting down with one of the astronauts, kind of talking to them about, you know, why they're basically here. And that's when Beard almost comes in, is like saying, like, he tells them, like, I'm speaking to, with the leader of our special guest. He's like, well, please forgive me, but I have information you're going to want to hear. He says, these new arrivals, they all bear the mark of double time. So he's like, double time? So soon? So the astronaut or the leader is saying like, Your Highness, is there something we should know? And he says, unfortunately, you won't be helping the rest of your planet. So she's like, no. He says, but you will bear witness to the birth of a new age, a glorious golden age. And she's just like, I don't understand. So he says, don't blame yourself. Powers beyond your comprehension are at work. And she's just saying, like, well, I just want my friends to be okay. And he says, oh, they will. They shall be woven into the new age, an age of unprecedented righteousness. And that's where Beardamos is saying, like, well, actually, about that, I sense something very dark lurking within one of the travelers or whatever. So he's saying, like, I'm concerned about the impact on the next bang. And then we see where one of the other astronauts who was inviting them to the orgy earlier walks in and he's like, are you coming down to the orgy? Because he's talking to like the commander and everything, like, are you coming or whatever? He says that egal is really something. So that's when Crony is just kind of standing there like, orgy? And they kind of explain to him like, yeah, the world we came from, it became so divided based off of like people's beliefs, and that factions went to war like over myths and everything. So he's like, stupid myths, because that's how she framed it. And then the other guy is saying like, but the wars ended the myths, killed the believers. We few survivors have banded together. We live only for each other, only for now. He's like, oh god, you idiots, like, myths make the world. And then he turns to Beardamos and says, is this the darkness you spoke of? But he says, I'm afraid not. There is something far darker within one of the travelers, something sinister. So he's like, all right, fine. Guards, take them into custody, make sure you hose them off and get the other ones and shit like that. And then he says, Beardamos, take a unit to deal with the sinister threat. So of course he takes off to go do that. And he tells like the guards that went with him, like, come with me, I have it safely locked away. So they walk in to find that Astro has been taken over by that giant bug and shit that has now created this whole suit of armor for him. And he's basically saying like, don't worry, Fuzzy, I'm here to save us all. So then we go over to the next story, and yes, of course, it opens up with the orgy that Egal is engaged in with one of the other, like, two of the other astronauts. So they're just kind of like saying, heretics, you're coming with us. And then she immediately tries to do that thing of like, look, guys, you probably don't recognize me because I'm not wearing my suit or whatever, but I'm Egal. And they tell her, oh, don't worry, we know it's you. All the more disappointing, but before they can even go any further with that, all of a sudden another guard runs up and is saying, like, there's a demon in the castle and everything. So they turn around, they're like, what the hell? As they're like getting slaughtered and shit by the Demon King. So like we can see where he's literally like decapitating dudes and shit. So he comes out and says like, sorry, but I didn't claw my way out of deep space in some poor soul's skull just to be done in by you. So like the people who were engaged in the orgy like run out along with one of the guards and everything. And then Egal is asking like, well, what is that thing? And the guard says, Beardamo said these visitors brought something evil. So the astronauts are like, that thing's face looked like AstroZeno. And she just kind of looks at them like, guys, I think you're going to need to find a new home. So then we go not that far away outside of the city and everything, where all of a sudden we can see where Witchtress is talking to Gary, like saying like, we're going to have our revenge and everything. And we can see where Dillo is kind of like running up to the city and everything. And as he gets closer, the guards look at him and they're like, isn't that Stud's steed? So of course they led him through. And then we go from there back over to the worst lands where Lava Voom is with Canna Peaches and they're like in the family crypt for Witchtress and everything. They're walking through and Canna Peaches is like, wow, this is a crypt. Like these like graves are huge. And Lava Voom tells him again, like, I told you she was the runt of the family and everything. And she's like, but she wasn't as much of a runt as this one that we came looking for. And they open the coffin to see, oh yeah, there's Gary. That's definitely him. So she's saying like, yep, that's Gary, the real Gary. Once we show Witchtress these bones, she'll realize that scamp with her is a phony, and all of a sudden, Canna Peaches starts throwing up, well, peaches, because that's what he's full of. So he throws up and she tells him like, yo, get a grip, calm down. And then she hears a sound. She's like, wait a minute, hold up. What's that sound? Is that a door? And then she looks over, like she melts the door down and they walk into this place that she says is actually for Queen Quark, which is Crony's wife. So she's still alive. And that's why because he tries to tell like, you're desecrating a grave. She's like, yo, it's not a grave yet. She's not even dead yet. So they go inside and kind of see like this huge coffin that's been designed for her. And she's asking, like, what is that thing? Canna Peaches finds some schematics saying, like, some kind of machine, recently constructed. These must be the schematics. Gross. And so we can kind of see where, I don't know who it is that was designing this. I'm assuming Crony or somebody was designing some way to, like, keep her contained and turning a stud into the Bloodblade. And you can see he kind of takes on the same shape as the Bloodblade and everything. Horrifying, but at least we have that idea of it. Anyway, So that's when the guards like let in Dillo and everything, and they're like, sorry, King Crony, but like he insisted on delivering the blade directly to you. So he's like, that's fine, guard, if disgusting. Dillo, where is your master? And then he looks at the like gem and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, you managed to get yourself stuck in the blade again. And then all of a sudden he hears like this large farting sound, so he looks over and he sees where Dillo just like crapped on the floor. He's like, really? Shit in the throne room? Is nothing sacred? But of course, his queen comes over and it's like, my lord, it's obvious the animal is very ill. So that's when they're like, or when the Demon King comes up, he's like, you think you're too good for feces? Think you can just flush it and forget it like it was never in your ivory tower? But when I slice you open, you'll see you're full of it. So he's like, wait a minute, in your hand, like those follicles, they're familiar. He says, is that Beardamos? He's like, well, it's what's left of the first guy who tried to flush me. So, of course, he sends the guards to attack him and everything. And then he hands the Bloodblade to one of them and is telling him, like, you know what you have to do. And he's just like, yeah, I know what I got to do. So we go back over to Gary, who comes across Roach Coach, who fell off of Dillo as he was running up to the city and everything. And he's like, oh, good kid, like, you need to go and, like, find me help and everything. But as soon as he tries to do that, like, Gary starts choking the shit out of him. And then before he can actually kill him, he disappears because, well, we come to find out, like, Witchtress comes up is like, hey, what happened to my son? Like, what are you doing here and everything? She's asking, where's Gary? He's like, is that the kid who's trying to punch my ticket? And she says, nonsense, my Gary is a very nice boy. So that's where we see Stud has come back, because what he ends up seeing is that the guard stabbed himself with the blade and able to like feed it blood and bring him out. So he's like, hey, did he just? And then all of a sudden King Crony tells him, like, Stud, you have to get into the fight. So he's like, all right, yes, sir. So he picks up the blade and goes and starts fighting with the Demon King, who just keeps like talking shit to him at first, saying like, with pants like yours, we should be on the same side. And he's like, leave my pants out of this. And he's like, well, you insist on dying. So they keep fighting. He says, I insist on protecting this world. And you wait. And he like stops and looks at him. He's like, those soft, full lips. Astro? And he's just like, I don't know who Astro is, but do you assume that I'm not myself or whatever? So he like throws him out of the way and shit. And then he's telling Stud, like, you need to get in there because there's only one guard left, as he's like cutting him down. So he's like, actually, it's zero. So he says, you didn't die right away. I knew there was something special about you. And he's saying, like, Astro, what's happened to you? He's like, Astro? I'm not Astro. I'm not just something you wear. So he's like, I'll skin one of you to prove it, as he's going towards the king and queen. But then we see Queen Quark immediately turn into like her bigger, more monstrous size, saying like, you're going to leave the king alone and everything. He's like, no, not yet. You're not supposed to do that yet. She's like, look, I need to do this because if you die, well, then everything kind of falls to shit. So she goes over to like fight the Demon King. He's like, big lady, don't defend this tyrant. I'm here to free us all, as she like smashes him into the ground. So she's like, ouch. And then she like picks him up and he's like, you stand with a tyrant, you fall with him too. As he like throws the damn Bloodblade into her eye. So of course that causes her to go falling, and she like falls over dead. But not before she takes out a pretty good portion of the city, as people are trying to flee and shit. So of course, like I said, she dies, and then the Demon King looks up over at the Omega Alpha, and he's like, moldering protoplasm on the wind, time to take down the ultimate tyrant and sing Kumbaya in oblivion. So he like takes off to go and like extinguish that, and then Crony's standing there just like, my queen, my plan. And of course Stud comes over. He's like, I'm sorry, Crony. And he's like, no, you failed. So he says, my king, Stud was always the failsafe for your ambitions. And that's where we see like a little scrap of Beardamos is still alive. He's like, yo. He's like, yeah, just barely. So he says, still enough to lend a hand. So he recreates Stud's hand and everything. And then he's saying like, yeah, I'll help you like finish this. As we see also Flora from before, who's like made up of plants and shit. She comes up and is saying like, you base the plans of man on a force of nature, but does not the levee break? So Stud is like, Flora, you look like and that's where we finally find out what happened with Dillo. She's like, yeah, he digested a lot of like Witchtress's poison out of me, but it did take a toll. As we can see, it did cost him his life. So she's saying like, when you make nature a tool, you pay a price. Stud is a force of nature. Use him at your peril. And he's like, no, I'm a priceless tool, as he starts running up the queen's body to go get the blade back and everything. So he's like, Crony, I'll see your will done. And then he like reaches into the like her eye socket, is like, sorry, my queen, it's really in there. So They're saying like, Stud, leave her alone. He's like, anything is possible when one tool wields another, and he like pulls the sword out and shit. So he takes off and he's like, to my wing shot to go after the Demon King. But once he gets there, he finds out, oh shit, someone already took it. So the guard there is kind of like telling him, Egal and those wicked strangers made off with it. They've bedeviled her. So he's like, Egal? No. And he tries to like call out to her the way that he normally does, but the Beardamo's hand tells him like, oh, don't worry. There's more than one way to fly and everything. So as Crony is there just kind of like mourning the loss of his queen, all of a sudden Witchtress shows up and is saying like, yo, my sister should have never joined you, but she didn't deserve to die for it. And he's like, at least I raised her above the brute force of your people. So she's like, you hypocrite, your Stud is nothing but brute force. So he's like, Stud is just the beginning. And then he says, raising the ground to build my eternal kingdom. She's like, glory built on the bones of my family. And then as she starts like exploding or just like powering up, Flora's like, oh my god, like your fury, it's too much. So that's when she finally like explodes the whole damn city as Stud is flying away. He's like, don't worry, Ouroboros, your salvation is nigh, because he has no idea what's going on behind him. So yeah, that's where we leave off on this, and we'll find out what happens in the final issue. Granted, like I said, I already know how the story's going to play out, but it should be interesting to cover it in one of the videos. So yeah, I don't know if anybody out there has actually bothered to pick up this story. You absolutely should, because this is one of those stories that's just, it's really good. It has hilarity, it has action, it just has all of the stuff that you want in a story, or at least all the stuff that I want in a story. And I like to think that I have at least semi-good taste. So there's that. I don't know. Ever since I first read this like whole thing digitally, just everything came together well. The story, the art, the comedy, like the humor in it and everything, like all of the elements come together so well. They're all blended very nicely. So I am definitely going to end up reviewing the third issue once I get it, but I definitely needed to make one for this just so that way y'all know of another like series out there. Granted, there are only 3 issues in this, but each one is like a double-sized like issue. Like you get 2 stories or twice as much of a story as you would from anywhere else. So it's pretty good. I gotta say, like, I really do love this storyline. I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, that's going to do it for me on this review. So I really do hope y'all will be willing to pick this up if you see it, when you see it. If you even just want to go online trying to find it, definitely do that. It is a great storyline. I guarantee you that. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on this, whether you've read it or not, do feel free to share those with me down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, then definitely like the video. Subscribe, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you've hit the notification bell so that way you know whenever I have new content out for you to enjoy. And if you would like, I would really appreciate it if you would share this video out. That way, you know, it actually gets out to people who may possibly also enjoy it as well. So if you're done here, guys, go and read a book, specifically this one. And if not, then I'll see you on my next video.